Hello everybody. Now in the last video we discussed a burning issue, and that was the heat waves. Today we'll discuss another contemporary topic, and that topic is called as what's referred to as dark oxygen. You would have seen recently in Hindu a report was published, and although it was published in a journal called Nature Geoscience in July 2024, and the scientists have discovered a type of oxygen which is present inside the oceans, deep inside the ocean, to a level of 13,000 feet even. And this type of oxygen is referred to as dark oxygen. So let's see what we are talking about. Now today we are we are introducing a new concept, that after discussing the topic, this topic of dark oxygen, there would be two objective type questions related to this, pertaining to this. We would be solving in the class itself. So let's do that. And for those topics which can be asked as question in your mains examination, a subjective question would be given to you to practice. But for those topics on which objective questions can be framed for preliminary examination, then the objective questions would be framed here on the board itself and given to you for practice. So that has been designed today, two questions designed on this topic today, and at the end we would be discussing those two questions as such. Now when you talk about the oceans, remember that the main source of oxygen is what? The source of oxygen, how oxygen is produced. Oxygen is produced through photosynthesis. Oxygen regeneration takes place through photosynthesis. And if you talk about oxygen regeneration, the main contribution in oxygen regeneration is made by the oceans. Why? Because more than 50% of oxygen is produced by oceans. So 50 to 70%, roughly about 70% oxygen is produced by ocean, more than 50%. And 30% is produced by forest. So these two are not only big carbon sinks, because they are also responsible for absorbing CO2, but they are also considered to be responsible for regeneration of oxygen. Oxygen regeneration takes place. So the biggest contribution is made by the oceans. And when we talk about oceans, in oceans, the planktons, oceanic planktons, phytoplanktons, the differing plants, the algae, some bacteria which are present in the ocean would be responsible for producing oxygen on a large scale. But then when you talk about oxygen, do remember that suppose this is the surface of ocean, and this is the oceanic floor. Oxygen which is present in the ocean would be confined to the upper part, mainly to a depth of about 600 meters in the ocean. Oxygen is sufficiently present. And to a depth of about 300 meters in the ocean, CO2 is present. CO2 is present. Why? Because oceans act as carbon sink. They are responsible for absorbing CO2 from atmosphere directly. And this CO2 is utilized by phytoplanktons, the algae, for photosynthesis. But CO2 is confined to 300 meter upper part of the ocean, because this part of ocean is in contact with the atmosphere. And if you talk about oxygen, sufficient amount of oxygen is present in the upper part to a depth of about 600 meters, which is utilized by the marine organisms for their survival. But if we consider from 600 meters to 1200 meters, this area has oxygen in adequate amount, and this area is called as OMZ. OMZ means oxygen minimum zone. Minimum zone. Beyond this area, very less amount of oxygen is present. Less of oxygen is present. But the question is that if we talk about the marine organisms which live at a greater depth, how do they survive? So, because the penetration of sunlight is not to a greater depth inside the ocean. So we can see that the area where sunlight is not present in the ocean, I'm repeating, the area where sunlight is not present in the ocean, it is present in the upper part only. So this part of the ocean where sunlight is not present would be called as what? It would be called as abyssal zone, where sunlight is not present. And what happens? A global circulation takes place. And this global circulation is called as the Great Conveyor Belt. So I'm writing here, the Great Conveyor Belt. And this Great Conveyor Belt is responsible for pushing the oxygen from the upper part of the ocean downwards. Upper part of the ocean downwards. So this is called as, this circulation is called as Great Conveyor Belt. So that the organisms which are present at the great depth, they would be surviving. This happens naturally. But even though this phenomena of Great Conveyor Belt takes place in the abyssal zone, the amount of oxygen which is present in the abyssal zone is what? Where sunlight do not penetrate. The amount of oxygen which is present in the abyssal zone is very less. Very less. So recently a study was published by the scientists in a journal which is called as Nature Geoscience. And this says what? This says that if you move to a greater depth inside the ocean, suppose 4 kilometers inside, at places, very high amount of oxygen is present. So how is that very high amount of oxygen was seen? The concentration of oxygen was more in those parts. So that happens to be a question. Now the scientists have found an answer to this. The answer to that is what? That if you look inside the oceans, suppose this is the surface of the ocean and this is the oceanic floor. So when we look at the oceanic floor, there are small rock-like structures present to the size, just like the size of a potato. These rock-like structures which are littered on the oceanic floor, they are called as what? They are referred to as polymetallic nodules. They are littered on the oceanic floor and are referred to as polymetallic nodules. In short, you can say PMNs. When we talk about PMNs, we can see that PMNs would be considered as an energy source. So you can say that this is energy source. Now, energy source does not mean that this would be burned in the thermal plant to produce energy. But energy source means that PMNs, polymetallic nodules, are utilized for what purpose? Are utilized for making the batteries of smartphones and laptops. That's why they would be considered as energy source. Clear? That's why they are considered as energy source. And the extraction of polymetallic nodules happens to be a concern. Because the concern is why? It may damage the marine ecosystem. But the International Seabed Authority is contemplating on the idea that nations should extract, and a number of contracts have been signed for this purpose, polymetallic nodules where it can be used for energy purpose. Now, if they are littered and they are distant apart, the extraction of polymetallic nodules cannot be economically feasible. But if suppose there is more than 10 kg of polymetallic nodules within 1 square meter, then economically it is more feasible to extract polymetallic nodules. Then it would serve some purpose. Now, when we talk about PMNs, In the year 2018, India launched a mission. And this mission, which was launched by the Ministry of Earth Sciences of India, was called as the Deep Ocean Mission. Deep Ocean Mission. It was launched by the Ministry of Earth Sciences of India with an allocation of rupees 8,000 crore. There were many objectives of the mission. One objective was to develop a desalination plant with the help of tidal energy. That was one of the objectives. The second objective was extraction of PMNs, polymetallic nodules. Extraction of polymetallic nodules. So this was another objective. And for this purpose, they would be developing a submersible vehicle which can carry 3 persons inside the ocean. And then polymetallic nodules can be extracted. For this purpose, the International Seabed Authority, which is based on the UNCLOS, the UN Convention on Law on Seas, allocated 75,000 square kilometer of the central Indian Ocean bed to India for this purpose. Now that was another thing. That was an initiative taken by the government of India. But when we talk about where is the concentration of PMNs more in the world, we can see it is in the Pacific Ocean. Pacific Ocean. And there is a place in the Pacific Ocean, and this is to the west of the Mexico coast. Mexico coast. And this place is called as what? This place is called as the clarion, clipperton zone, where the concentration of polymetallic nodules is very high. So the International Seabed Authority has signed a number of agreements with more than 20 nations. India happens to be one of them, for extraction of PMNs. So deep sea mining would be conducted. Already we can see China is surging ahead in that also, because 17% of the contract has been backed by China itself. China itself. Now, we started the topic dark oxygen. So how is PMNs connected to dark oxygen? Now, PMNs have a characteristic, because if you talk of the surface of the PMNs, the surface of the PMNs, they carry electric charge. Electric charge. And they would be responsible for transporting electric charge. So, roughly about 0.95 volts is present on the surfaces of the PMNs. And for splitting water into oxygen and hydrogen, what is required is 1.5 volt. This is required. And we have what? We have 0.95 volt, which is present on the surface of PMNs. So if the PMNs are very close to each other, they can muster the capacity, and this capacity would be utilized for splitting the water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen. And this is the reason why oxygen is present deep inside the ocean also. And at certain places, we can see oxygen is present in greater amount, should have been very less, according to our knowledge till now. But this knowledge says that, this new discovery says that if you go deep inside the ocean, there are certain places where the oxygen level is high. And this is due to the presence of PMNs, which is littered on the oceanic floor, because they have the capacity, they have the 0.95 volt is present on the surfaces of the PMNs. And when they are close to each other, they muster the capacity to split water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen. You know very well that how much oxygen is required. When you talk about the survival of organism is based on oxygen only. Clear? And a number of agencies are responsible for producing oxygen. But this you should know as a topic for both mains as well as preliminary examination. Clear? And this is about dark oxygen that you have to understand. Just remember the fact that polymetallic nodules, polymetallic sulfides, and polymetallic nodules are mainly made up of what? They are mainly made up of iron, nickel, cobalt, and manganese. And they are utilized for energy purpose. And the way how they are utilized for energy purpose, just now we discussed. Clear? Now let's try to solve a question, two objective type questions related to this topic. Let's see those questions. Now the first question which I have drafted for you is, which among the following bacteria produces maximum oxygen? And four options have been given to you: Prochlorococcus, Synchlorococcus, Proteobacteria, and Chlorobi. The correct answer is first one, Prochlorococcus. And this is this is a small bacteria, marine bacteria, a type of cyanobacteria, and which is responsible for producing 20% of oxygen. Remember, 20% of oxygen which is present in the biosphere. So this alone produces 20% of the. So it can be asked as a question anytime in your preliminary examination. So remember the name of the bacteria, and this is one question. You can take a look at it. The second question I have drafted is, consider the following statements. First statement is, one of the objectives of Deep Ocean Mission of India is extraction of polymetallic nodules, PMNs. That's true, because just now we have discussed that the many objectives of the Deep Ocean Mission, establishment of a desalination plant with the help of tidal energy, and also extraction of polymetallic nodules by developing a submersible vehicle which can go deep inside the ocean, can carry 3% inside. Second statement that I have put forward is, PMNs can produce oxygen in abyssal zone. That's also correct, because the entire discussion that we made right now is based on PMNs and how they are responsible for splitting the water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen. And third is, more than 50% of oxygen is produced by oceans. This is also true. So all the three statements are correct. So how many of the above statements are correct? So we can say C is the correct option. Clear? So today's topic was dark oxygen, and you can see two questions also pertaining to that framed for you. Similarly, we would be picking up other topics, not only from environment and ecology, but also from disaster management, international relations, biotechnology, and other parts of science and technology even. So this much for today. Thank you so much.